Good evening and welcome to the Brockton Zoning Board of Appeals for the month of December 2020. I will now call the meeting to order and I will introduce our board members. The five members tonight that will be sitting in on these cases is member Stephen Bernard, Fire Chief Michael Williams, member Craig Pina, member Stephen Lianis, and chairperson myself, Kenneth Galligan. Our zoning enforcement officer, building superintendent, and clerk of the board is Mr. James Plouffe. The recording secretary for tonight's meeting is Beth Lacombe. I would ask anyone that has any electronic devices, such as cell phones or whatever, to please turn them off so that it doesn't interrupt the course of the meeting tonight. Prior to starting, I am going to read a document, a notice regarding this public hearing to be held virtually. In accordance with Governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A and 20, relating to the 2020 novel coronavirus outbreak emergency, this public meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals will be open to the public. However, the public and all applicants are encouraged to participate remotely. This meeting will be televised via Brockton Community Access TV. Public comments will be taken via Zoom or by email to jplouffe@cobma.us. The comments will be read during the public document portion of the agenda item. Prior to starting tonight's meeting, is there any participants tonight that wish to withdraw prior to the start of the hearing? Mr. Plouffe, do we have any?
We do not.
All right, I have one from the Zoning Board of Appeals. There was an advertisement for tonight's hearing relative to a discussion on possible changes to the official bylaws of the Brockton Zoning Board of Appeals. That has been withdrawn and it will not be heard this evening. The format for tonight's hearing is when I call a case, the petitioner will come forward and make the presentation to the board. Following the completion of the presentation by the petitioner, I will then ask for any questions of any of the board members relative to the petitioner's comments during the presentation. Following any questions from the board, I will then open it up to public discussion for anyone who may want to speak in favor of the petition. Following that, I will then ask those who may be in opposition to speak in opposition. Lastly, I will ask for any elected officials that may want to comment on the petition. Following that, I will close that portion of the public hearing, and then I will open it up to deliberations of the board members. This is deliberations only for the board members. The board members will discuss what has been presented, and at some point, a board member will make a motion. When a motion is made and seconded, I will then call for a roll call vote. In order for a petition to pass, there must be a minimum of 4 affirmative votes and 1 negative vote. If there are 5 affirmative votes, obviously the petition is granted. If the vote is 4 in favor, 1 in the negative, the petition will be granted. A 3-2 vote will fail. So anything less than 4 affirmative votes, the petition will not pass. I will then announce the decision of the board. I will announce the result of the hearing, and I will then notify the petitioner whether the petition has been denied or granted. All right, the first case that's before us tonight. The petition of Paul E. Clancy Jr., Esquire, 71 Legion Parkway, Suite 226, Brockton, Mass., for a variance from Section 2729 to construct a 2-family home in a C2 zone located at 547 Main Street. Mr. Clancy.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair, board members, and Mr. Clerk. Paul Clancy on behalf of the petitioner. In this case here, we are seeking relief from section 27-29 of the zoning bylaws. And what we are proposing is to construct a two-family dwelling in a C2 zone. Currently, it's a vacant lot. And it's my understanding that it has been vacant for quite some time. In fact, I was speaking to one of the neighbors who informed me that this property used to be a multi-use property with a couple of storefronts on the first floor and approximately 4 or 5 apartments on the second and third floor. And that property, according to the neighbor, and that was Robert Van Duzen of the Italian Kitchen, informed me that he was familiar with that property, had been in that property, and believes that that property was raised approximately 10 years ago. So it has sat idle for the past 10 years. And what we're looking to do is construct a two-family dwelling according to the plans that we had submitted. And the only relief that we are looking for is the use requirement. As the board is aware that a two-family dwelling is not a permitted use in a C2 zone. However, I would suggest to the board members that it would not derogate to the intent and purpose of zoning, as many of these properties are, or I should say that there are numerous multi-family dwellings in this area. In fact, this property, which sits on the corner of Main Street and Hervey Street, Hervey Street is all residential. There's no commercial buildings, except for there is one property that abuts the subject property to the west, and that is a restaurants products business. But other than that, it's all residential on Hervey Street. Now, Main Street is commercial use. You have the Family Dollar across the street. You have a barber shop across the street, but you also have within that area peppered in are numerous multifamily dwellings. In fact, across from the Vicente Market, I believe is a 10 or a 12 apartment building. Now, the plans call, and I don't know if it's a whole lot, but I think you guys all have the plans there, but as you can see, we had proposed to put the parking in the rear. And the reason why Mr. Farrier had put the parking in the rear, because Hervey Street is a one-way street. And it would be less burden on the traffic in Main Street if cars aren't backing out onto Main Street to come in and leave the property. And as I suggested, Hervey Street is a one-way street. They would come down Hervey Street and enter the property in the rear. I would suggest to the board that the hardship here is the size of the lot. This lot it's 6,408 square feet. It is not conducive to the permitted uses in a C1 or a C2 zone, primarily due to the fact that there's just not sufficient parking. In fact, we were able to fit in 4 parking spaces here, and that was somewhat tight. And I would also suggest too that the fact that this property sits on the corner of a main street and a one-way street makes it less conducive to the permitted use, in that you would be directing traffic all down this residential street from a potential commercial use. We would, if you take a look at the plans, it's a 3-bedroom, 3 bedrooms on each floor. We would stipulate that we would never turn this into a 3-family or allow this property to be a 3-family. It will always stay at 2, and we would stipulate to that. But we feel that this is a better fit than trying to jam in a commercial use in that small lot.
You all set?
All set. Thank you, Chief.
Okay, any questions from any of the board members relative to this presentation?
Yeah,
What are your plans for green space?
Green space, well, there is a tree, there's already a tree on there. And that tree that you see there really isn't, not something that he was suggesting to put up. It was already there. But if the board would like to see some additional plantings, he certainly would not oppose that. In fact, if the board wishes to have any sort of fences along the property lines to protect any of the neighbors, he certainly would do that as well. And the back, we're really not interfering with our neighbors. We're not really interfering with our neighbors in the back because, as you can see, that is a commercial use building. And as I said, that's the only commercial use building on Hervey Street. And there's quite a bit of room from this proposed house to the property that abuts them to the north, and then the property that abuts them to the south is also a mixed commercial use, and it's across Hervey Street.
Mr. Pena, do you have a question?
yeah, I'm looking at a very tiny lot, and you're proposing 6 bedrooms on such a small lot. There is no other hardship than just the size of the lot, because the frontage is very minimal, and there is little room for anything else. To put 6 bedrooms on such a small lot seems a bit much to me.
Well, I think it's 3 bedrooms per unit, and as I had suggested, we're not going to turn this into a 3-family. And I would also suggest to the board that it is consistent with many of the other properties in the area.
I had a question relative to green space. It seems to me that the green space is going to be the whole north side, the front, and the side on Hervey Street. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
To the north of the property, and to the south of the property, right on the sides. Yes.
Well, the only blacktop we're going to see is where the cars are parked.
You won't really see that, right?
Yeah. Any other question from any other board members? If not, I'm going to close that portion of the hearing. I'm going to open it up to public discussion. Is there anyone here that wants to speak in favor?
I do not see any, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'll close that portion of the hearing. Is there anyone here that wants to speak in opposition?
Yes, I'd like to speak in opposition, please.
Please identify yourself.
My name's Robert Owens II. My father and I own the commercial property that abuts this property that's going to be trying to put in the 2-family.
Do you own the supply place?
Yes, Bay State Restaurant Products.
Okay, very good. Go ahead.
So we've been operating business on Hervey Street for 74 years now. And already we have a major problem with parking on Hervey Street, where there are many multifamilies around the area, and most of them have very little parking and lots of overflow. So we have cars parking up and down the street all hours of the day, all the time. Already we have issues with our business with parking. Like today, I had customers coming to pick up units that we had repaired and try to pick up small wares from us. And they actually had to temporarily double park out front because there's no way to contact the people that are already parked out there. And I had to run out and load the stuff, and they had to take off. So we're already, losing out on some browsing time for our customers and things like that. Come snow time, the snow is always pushed to our side of the street, which for many, many years since my grandfather, we've actually taken care of the street All of our neighbors, the sidewalk out front with our own personal skid steer. A lot of the parking for the business out front on Main Street, they actually have a hair salon there, and all of that parking ends up all revolving around that lot and the outside of that lot on Hervey Street, which overflows onto us already. That building that they spoke about that abuts the property on the opposite side of Hervey has next to no parking already. Then the next building to that is another multi that has, I want to say it's either 4 or 5 units, if I'm not mistaken, also with very little parking, and all of their overflow comes onto Hervey as well. So I'm just not understanding where they really plan on having people park. I know they already said that 4 spaces look to be very tight with the lot. So I can only imagine, as we all know, at the very least, there's usually 2 cars within a household. And in Brockton, I'd like to say there's usually 3 cars if there's a 3-bedroom per unit. So I'm wondering where they plan to have those people parked for overflow. I'm also, like you said, the green space, where they plan on putting it, because that lot is very small. We actually pick up the trash from that lot on our own all the time. I pass through there to patronize a restaurant that's on the other side of Main Street on a weekly basis. And that lot is very small for a multifamily and all that parking. I'm also wondering, parking during construction, if this were to go through, where would all these trucks park? Are they going to be parking on Main Street, or are they going to be parking right in front of our business during this whole construction time? Trash is another issue. Do they plan on having street pickup? If they do, where is it going to go? Because all the cars block that area right there every single day. There's no way a trash truck would be able to pick up there. Also, if they had a dumpster, I'd have to assume they would have it pretty much positioned right up against our building. So I'm curious how that would work. Also, obviously it's in question because it's not permitted in the zoning that it's at now. I think that's the majority of the things that have been kind of a reason why we're in opposition.
Okay, very good. Do you have access to your property from Dilva Street?
I do, yes.
Okay.
Our storefront is on Hervey, though. It's been there since 1946.
Anyone else want to speak in opposition?
I see no other, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'm going to close that portion of the hearing. Is there any public officials that want to be heard on the issue?
I see none, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'm going to close that portion of the hearing. I will now open it up for deliberations from board members.
Chief,
Very, very, very small lot, and to put actually 6 bedrooms in a lot this size, I don't see how it fits.
Chief, you had brought up the question of does the Bay State have access to Dover Street? Does anyone know if there is parking in the rear of Bay State since it goes to Dover Street?
I'm sorry, there is not.
There is not?
No, our storefront is on Hervey Street, and on the back side, we have an easement that comes through, and we just have a 3 parking spot that's beside the 2-family that is next to us on the opposite side.
Okay, I'm going to close that portion because this is open for deliberations from the board. I appreciate your help.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yep, no problem. That answer your question, Mr. Bernard?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. So there really isn't any parking available, only on-street parking for Bay State. And that exacerbates the problem of parking, in my mind, for a 2-family with 3 apartments in each floor.
One of the options they could explore is through the traffic commission for limited parking in front of their place of business. If that's been a problem, I'm surprised they haven't requested some kind of relief through parking because of the business, but that's an option. I will say that despite the best efforts of the Brockton Fire Department, we had a major fire in that building that was probably at least 12 years ago anyway. And the building was destroyed in the fire. There were at least two commercial occupancies on the first floor, and there was multi-apartments up above. So that's what was there. And then after the fire, this lot has stood empty there for probably 10 or 12 years at least. If there was a commercial occupancy that went in on that piece of property, the situation with the parking certainly wouldn't get any better than it is if it was to be used for the potential of the residential. It's a very small lot for a commercial use that would probably mostly require on-street parking. So it's one of those old neighborhood lots that sits in a commercial zone that has reached the stage that it has.
You know, I think a residential property is the best use for that piece of property. I just have a problem with 3 bedrooms, six bedrooms because of the parking situation. So I'm torn.
Well, they do show 4 off-street parking spots on the plan.
Mhm.
That blacktop area that's up against the Bay State Restaurant Supply right now, that blacktop parking goes with this lot that's in question tonight. That does not belong to Bay State. So they're actually showing off-street parking for at least 4 cars off of Hervey Street. When I went down and looked at it, I thought that blacktop might have gone with the commercial occupancy, but according to the plan, it does not. It goes with this lot.
I'm going to make a motion to grant. This is Steve. I'm making a motion to grant.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to grant. So the clerk please call the roll.
Ms. Delanus.
Yes.
Mr. Pina.
No,
Mr. Bernard.
Yes.
Chief Williams.
Yes.
Chairman Galligan.
Yes.
That is a 4-1, 4 in the affirmative, 1 in the negative, Chairman.
Okay, the vote is 4 in the affirmative, 1 in the negative. The petition is granted.
Thank you, members of the board.
The next petition, the petition of Enterprise Rent-A-Car Company of Boston, LLC, 1095 West Chestnut Street, Brockton, Mass., for a variance from section 2733 to operate a commercial use being the rental of motor vehicles in an I-1 location at 1095 West Chestnut Street. Is the petitioner ready?
I think we're just waiting for Attorney Nezrela, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
He's not that sharp with technology, so it might take him a couple seconds.
be nice now.
I'm looking for his daughter. There we go.
Can anybody hear me?
I hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry I'm not on screen. I don't know what I did not hit or should have hit. I think the zoning board blocked me out intentionally. But in any event, With me this evening is Miss Caitlin O'Neill, who's Regional Manager of Enterprise Rent-A-Car. The petition and application this evening is to allow their use at a location on West Chestnut Street, 1095 West Chestnut Street, which was formerly occupied by the Crescent Credit Union. It is on the, sits at the intersection of West Chestnut Street and Liberty Street. Enterprise Rent-A-Car has been in Brockton and servicing the residents for well over 20 years. It had two locations, one on Warren Avenue and one on North Main Street. The one on Warren Avenue is closed, and they are looking to put their second location at the intersection of Liberty and West Chestnut Street. They have, for many, many years, serviced people throughout the city, both residents, both the auto body and auto repair shops who service individuals' motor vehicles, as well as some of the car sale and dealerships. The location would, putting on the west side where they're getting a lot of demand at that particular location in and around that area, that would minimize a lot of the cross-city traffic, which currently is exercised when they service a client. When they get the call from the customer, they usually go to where that customer is, pick them up, bring them back to the location, and then we'll provide them with the automobile. A lot of the auto repair shops will have the person's car for about 3 or 4 days, and that individual is in need of these rentals. They oftentimes will also service dealerships that have overflow, such as Bernardi, Copeland Toyota, Copeland Chevrolet. The lot in question that has been vacant and is owned by the Mr. Connie has 29 spaces. The rent-a-car facility very rarely has that amount of cars on site. They bring in their cars from off-site depending upon the need. They also usually try to keep minimum hours and are not open late in the evenings. In fact, their requested hours as part of this application would be Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., Saturdays and Sundays, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. The former, one of the ironies with this location being in an industrial zone, when one traverses up and down West Chestnut Street, you see it dotted with so many commercial locations, and even locations which are deemed industrial but have a commercial flavor, such as the food establishments, sub shops, coffee shops, donut shops, and an assortment of other businesses. In fact, the I-1 zone allows for new vehicle sales and services, and you would think part and parcel of that would also be having a rent-a-car to assist in the primary businesses of new vehicles and services. So I think the integration of Enterprise Rent-A-Car, again, a longtime Brockton business, would be very harmonious and fit in well with that particular region. And to answer a question in advance, I strongly believe that this is clearly a situation where a literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would involve substantial hardship, wherein the former bank site has not been able to do anything with that location, lease it out, or sell it to a ready, able buyer. And the other financial effect has been on Enterprise Rent-A-Car to find a location which would fit in with the area and also be able to service the people within the region. So allowing this would not be detrimental to the public good, nor would it nullify or substantially derogate from the intent or purposes of the ordinances on which we live by? So I would submit to the board that the acceptance and grant of this business establishment would be in furtherance of what our goals and objectives are with business, is to create a strong commercial base that services and does positive contribution to the citizenry of the community and also to the city. So with that, I would be more than pleased to accept any questions regarding the application.
Hey, thank you. Any questions from board members?
Yes, Council, in your presentation, you mentioned that their enterprise, as part of their operation at other locations, was not only rental, but resale of used rental cars.
No, I don't believe I mentioned
Let me
that.
finish the question first.
Okay.
Is it the intention to just be a rental operation, or will they be selling used or rental cars on the lot?
No, if I stated such, I misspoke. It's only for rental.
Okay. Thank you.
Along those same lines, are they intending to do any repairs on vehicles there?
No, they are not. And Miss O'Neill, you can correct me if I misspeak.
No, you're correct.
So if this were granted, two stipulations right up front would be no repairs on site and no resale of vehicles on site.
That's acceptable.
Any other board members have any questions? I have a question. If you look at the chart, the layout on the back north side of the property on Liberty Street, you have parking space 1, 2, 3, and 4 heading east and west, and all the others heading north and south.
Yes.
If you look at that distance between the back of those vehicles and the garage, it looks like it's about 15 feet. Is there any particular reason why spaces 1, 2, 3, and 4 need to be maintained there? It looks like it's really jamming up the circumference of that building.
Mr. Chair, we're really just looking to get as many spaces as we can on the property. The best we could do is make those spaces parallel spaces, and in doing so, we did make the traffic flow around the building a one-way traffic flow. As you said, it's only 15 feet from the closest space to that back left-hand corner of the building. So that's really the best we can in that area. It really won't be open to the public. Essentially, the customers driving in the front would exit. The cars that were parked there would be brought around by the enterprise employees. So it's really not a circulation issue, or even an issue of blocking those spaces in with the tandem type parking. We just needed the spaces just to get the number of cars up to 20, over 20 spaces on the lot.
So I guess if you can't fit through there, you're not going to come back. And the other comment that I would make is, where are you going to put snow when you remove snow up there? When you look at parking spaces 1, 2, 3, 4, and all those other cars, those are right tight against the fence. And when you draw it on a chart, I mean, it's different than what it actually is. You know, I'm not going to belabor the point. It's just that it's pretty tight on that north side.
I agree.
You don't have much room here to get rid of snow.
Yep. No, just to answer that question, Mr. Chairman, there'd be two choices. Obviously, they really can't put it on either of the 4 lot lines like you would typically do. So they have two choices. They can either truck it off site, or they would pile it up in a couple of the spaces and reduce the number of cars they would be able to put on the lot during a snow event or a snow storage event. But for the most part, it would be removed off site.
What's deceiving up there is when you go look at the site and you encompass the next door building, 1105, with that same blacktop parking lot. It looks like a very large lot, but if a fence was ever put up there, you'd suddenly see how small the lot is for that. Yeah, and I'm sure they're going to have to deal with that. So, all right, any other questions from any board members? If not, I'm going to open it up for public discussion. Is there anyone here that wants to speak in favor?
I do not see any, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'm going to close that portion of the hearing. Is there anyone who wants to speak in opposition?
I do not see any, Mr. Chair.
Okay, are there any public officials that want to be heard on the issue?
No public officials have come up to say anything.
Okay, I'm going to close that portion of the hearing. I am now going to open it up for deliberations from the board. Board members.
I see this as a great location for this. Enterprise just generally doesn't generate a lot of parking lot traffic, and seeing how the credit union probably generated more traffic when it was there, operating for so many years. And since they built their new building and they moved to Belmont Street, there really hasn't been anything suitable to go into the location. I think this is a great spot for it.
It seems to be in harmony with a lot of the other auto dealerships that we've allowed to go up there. If this is granted, we talked about a couple of stipulations that there would be no repairs on site and no resale of vehicles on site. The hours of operation, we can recommend the hours of operation, but I think that final decision would be with the license commission.
Yeah, I think they generally have their set hours of operation, which are extremely reasonable, and there's not a lot of residences around there to they'd be infringing upon anyway. So I'd like to make a motion to grant with the two stipulations you previously mentioned.
Second.
Did I hear a second?
Yes, Steve here.
Okay, so a motion has been made and seconded to grant with the stipulations as mentioned. The clerk will please call the roll.
Mr. Delanus,
Yes.
Mr. Pina,
Yes.
Mr. Bernard,
Yes.
Chief Williams,
Yes.
Chair Galligan.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, that's a 4 in the affirmative. I mean, 5 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative.
5 affirmative votes, no negative votes. The petition is granted.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
The next petition, the petition of Joseph P. Stadelman, Irrevocable Trust, 56 Cherry Street, Brockton, Mass., for a variance from section 27.9, 2726, 2748, and 2718 to be allowed to construct and operate a residential apartment complex with parking and relief from dimensional and green space requirements in an R2 zone located at 56 Cherry Street. The petitioner ready?
We are. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the Zoning Board of Appeals. My name is Jim Burke. I'm an attorney at law. I have offices at 48 North Pearl Street in Brockton, Massachusetts. I'm pleased to assist Joe Stadelman in this matter. The Stadelmans have been a long-term client, and Joe and I in this specific parcel go back to the year 1986 when he purchased the property from David Becker. Some of you may recall that the property is in basically a residential neighborhood with a substantial amount of multifamily residentials properties that surround it. The Becker property at that time was engaged in the hard use tannery business. And when Joe and the family purchased it, it was with the intention of moving their electrical business to the 56 Cherry Street site and at the same time have some a commercial and business office rental use. They made the move. They have successfully been there conducting operations, basically to identify the property. It is a pre-existing non-conforming in that there are two significant structures on site. One is the brick building, which is to the south of the property. And that building is where they have traditionally maintained their Stadelman Electrical Contracting Services business. It's also where they've had business offices for rental. The property to the north is where they have been utilizing their wholesale business for electrical products. And that is the specific structure that they're seeking to have converted to a residential use. The property has been buffered by the Stadelmans as they've acquired over the years significant parcels to create a bigger footprint in which to operate both businesses. And specifically, they've appeared in front of you 2001, 2009, and 2016 to incorporate various parcels into the current business operation. Basically, what has occurred now is that the Stadelmans have been conducting construction on the northerly property that hopefully will be granted the ability to be utilized as a multifamily structure. And in order to correct significant code issues in relation to the property. They are putting in an elevator that will go from the floors down to the basement. They have made it handicap accessible, and the property is in fact and will be fully sprinkled. Essentially, what they're looking for is they're looking for this board to grant relief for 30 residential structures on the property that are made up of 24 one-bedroom units, 3 two-bedroom units, and 3 studio units. The property is shown on the plan that Scott Farrier produced, and Scott is with us today to assist and correct me where I'm wrong. That property was brought before the planning board that Mr. Pina may be aware, in which they were granted a Form A division of the real estate. Well, as I'm sure all of the members of the board realize, that you can divide property by terms of a Form A when there is sufficient frontage and there is also sufficient size of the property, square feet, in terms of meeting the zoning board. So essentially, you have two legitimate lots for building purposes with the Form A lot. One would be the existing brick building, which would house or which would maintain 70 parking spaces, well in excess of what they're required. Specifically for the residential, there would be 50 spaces, of which they will be seeking relief from the Zoning Board of Appeals. I believe, though, of the 50 spaces, based on the number of units, the 1.5 factor works well. They have existing 45 spaces, and it would, in fact, work well, as we've seen with the multifamily properties. The two vehicles generally is more than is required. In addition, if there is a problem, you obviously have the ability to have additional rental of spaces from the other lot, because it is owned and will be maintained by the Stadelman family. The structure as it is will and has an entryway, a common area. They've also created access for drive up for Amazon, UPS, to eliminate that problem. There is a request for setback relief, and I'm going to let Scott get into both the setback relief as well as the variance for green space on the property. Essentially, in looking at this specific property, one of the issues that the board can consider in granting a relief from a variance which relates to size, shape, topography, soil conditions that uniquely affect the property and the zoning district as a whole. And relief can be granted without derogating from the intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance. Here, there's a couple of multiple factors. The fact that you had two very substantial structures on a single lot at the time that it was created, all of which predated the Zoning Board of Appeals, I think mitigates the fact that there is, in fact, a problem with the side setback requirement of the property. Also, what you're essentially doing is you're reducing the amount of commercial invasion into the residential section by basically providing a utilization that's in conformity with the existing surrounding properties in the multifamily. I think that you can grant substantial relief. And one of the issues that our cases have cited over the years is that relief can be granted, especially when there is substantial existing structures in the property that are, their uses are not conducive to the surrounding neighborhood. I submit to you that because of the ceiling height, because of the lack of access to highway traffic for the particular uses that is allowed in the R2 zone, that this specific structure that's functioning as a warehouse basically is non-functional and can't be utilized for that purpose. So the reuse, and the best reuse, is to meld it into the existing surrounding neighborhood so that you have something in conformity with the neighbors and to allow the residential structures. I'm going to let Scott get into the plans for the subdivision, but I will point out one other factor. You may wonder in terms of access to Warren Avenue, but what happens is there will ultimately be granted an easement for access between the two properties. As I'm sure the members of the board understand, when the Stadelmans continue to own the property, both in their same names, then you can't create an easement to yourself. So if at some point that the Stadelmans were to sell or transfer out one of the properties, an easement would be created so that there would be the ability to gain access both from Cherry Street to Warren Avenue. So Scott, I'm going to let you go in terms of identifying the parking and the fact that the footprint hasn't changed on the existing structure. And if you could be assistance, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, just to, I guess, help in clarifying the plan, as Attorney Burke said, we're before the Brockton Planning Board recently to divide the property into two lots, lots A and B. And on the zoning table, we tried to break the two uses and what exists on each of the lot separately, and mainly just to clarify the parking. So if I can just get into that for a second, with the office space, we need 47 spaces. With the residential at 2 spaces per unit, we need 60. So we need a total of 107 spaces to conform to zoning, when in actuality, we have 125 spaces on the property. So we looked at a couple of ways to divide the property so we wouldn't need to seek relief from you folks for the parking, but it really didn't work out in a way that made any sense to try to get the 60 required spaces on Lot B, the residential portion of the property. So in this case, we felt fairly comfortable in asking you folks for the parking waiver, mainly because there will essentially be shared parking. The residential properties will be able to use the office spaces overnight and on the weekend when the office is obviously with regular business hours will be closed. In their 75 spaces, the majority of them will free up. So even though we were asking for that waiver from the variance from 60 required spaces down to 50 for the residential, realistically, we don't think it'll ever be used. Not to mention that 24 of the units are 1-bedroom units. So we've really cut down on the number of bedrooms in the property. The only other thing I guess to talk about is just the green space. In total, we have 15% green space on the site. If you've driven by the site, you can see the Stadelmans have done a good job in landscaping around the perimeter, either with vegetation or with fences. So they've really done a pretty good job protecting and buffering their properties from the neighbors. And that 15% green space is really about the best we can do with what's on the site. But if you look at the site, it really doesn't look like a mass of pavement like we see in a lot of parking spots. They're really broken up into little 15 space areas with landscaping between the parking zones. So I think they've done a pretty good job, even though they're a little less than what's required. They've done a pretty good job in landscaping it, and it on the site, it really doesn't look like it's insufficient. The property, as Attorney Burke said, has been before you folks. It's been before planning board for site plan approval in the past. It'll have to go back to planning board for this particular use, but all of the utilities on site have been approved by the planning board through site plan approval. Existing drainage systems were all designed and constructed, are in good working order right now. So we don't really have any issues utility wise either, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all set?
Yes, sir.
Any questions from the board?
Yes, if all apartments are fully utilized and occupied, how many people would be living in this complex?
Well, there's 24 one bedrooms, 3 2 bedrooms, and 3 studios, which are essentially 1 bedroom. So there's 27 1 bedrooms and 3 2 bedrooms. So, you know, I guess maybe 60, 60 people, assuming the 1 bedrooms. If we assume there's 2 people per unit, even though I'm sure some of them will be single occupied, but probably a maximum of 60 and probably more like 40 people, I would guess.
I'm asking that question because we're concerned about density in the
Sure.
neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay, I have 2 comments. One is on your plan. You're showing on the parking lot on the west side towards North Warren Avenue. It appears as though we have an island that goes across that parking lot with vegetation on it. If this were to be granted, that would have to be maintained so that you don't have that look of a vast blacktop parking lot. You know what I'm saying?
Agreed. Yes, sir.
So if this was approved, that would be a stipulation that as what's shown on this plan.
Yes.
The other thing that I would comment on in the plans for the building itself, I know there's an awful lot of windows in the building, but in stairwells or any dead end area, it is very helpful if there is natural light that comes into these hallways. And I think if you look at the plans, you may see a couple of the stairwells that I did not see any windows in the stairwells. And I would encourage that if this were to be built, if this was to be granted, that there'd be windows in those stairwells. And that helps in fire operations, but more likely, people don't like to walk into dark areas.
Sure.
And when you have natural lighting in there, it's a much better looking arrangement. I do agree with you that this is a factory that was built prior to zoning. It doesn't have much reuse to it whatsoever. If this building were to be torn down, I'm sure that other multifamily houses probably would be built pretty much on the same footprint.
Right.
So I will say, just as a comment, that Mr. Saddleman over the years has done everything that this board has asked for and more. He's been very cooperative with this board. On the layout for the access in and out of this property, I see access from Cherry Street, Ford Street, and North Warren Avenue. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So this driveway that goes out to North Warren Avenue, if this property was ever sold, what I'm seeing is that dividing line right now in the middle of that driveway going out. So that's where the adjustment would have to be made if this property was sold. Is that?
I think if the property was sold, Mr. Chairman, we would have to do a whole series of cross easements for both parking, access, utilities. Basically, so each lot could still access and use the other lot's infrastructure.
Well, I'll
So
tell you, in my consideration on making a vote on this tonight, I am considering that this property will always have 3 ways to get in and out of this property.
Agreed.
You're telling us that that's what the plan is.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any other comments from any board members?
Yeah, I'd like to echo the sentiments of the chair that the owners of the property have done everything that we've asked for over the years in coming before the board. I also think that they've done an exemplary job in upgrading what could have been a disaster for this multifamily residential neighborhood. They've really added value to the neighborhood with the building that they currently have their offices in. And now, if they continue to do what they have done in the past, this will be an upgrade, a continued upgrade for that neighborhood in that section of the city.
All right, any other questions from any of the board members? Everybody good? I'm going to close that portion of the hearing. I'm going to open it up now for public discussion. Is there anyone here that wants to speak in favor?
I see none, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'm going to close that portion of the hearing. I'm now going to open it up for discussion relative to opposition. Is there anyone here that wants to speak in opposition?
I see none, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'm going to close that portion of the hearing. Is there any public officials that want to be heard on this issue?
Good evening, board members. It's Shirley Azak, Ward 7 City Councilor.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having this evening. I'm here before you this evening to speak in favor of this petition. I met with Mr. Stadelman about a month ago at the proposed location and toured the area. And I have to say, as of this evening, I have not received any phone calls or emails from any constituents, whether in opposition or regarding this project. So I know that people in the area have not called, have not, and I know they've gotten abutters notices, so, which is a good thing. The Stadelmans have a well-established business in the city, as you all know and have stated, and as well as being longtime residents. You can see their pride and ownership in their properties, and I have faith that this development will be a nice addition to the neighborhood. So I hope that the board will move favorably on this petition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your input. Is there any other elected officials that want to be heard on the issue?
I see none, Mr. Chair.
Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close that portion of the hearing. I will open it up for discussion among the board members. Board members, any discussion?
I had asked a question earlier about the number of residents if all apartments are filled. And the answer is between 50 and 60. That is quite a large number of people added to that neighborhood. However, there is ample parking, 50 in the newly constructed parking area, and there's room because there are 70 parking spaces in the industrial to take care of any necessary overflow. So the density problem is not a problem relative to parking.
Well, this has been a hulking building, I guess you'd describe it, in that neighborhood for a number of years. I know many years ago it fell into disrepair and it was quite an eyesore. Lately, it has been pretty well kept up, and there probably is no other use for this building It has no commercial value sitting in the middle of a residential neighborhood. It's probably the best reuse of this building. These were built prior to zoning, and they built these buildings in the neighborhoods where the people lived and they actually walked to work. And we have neighborhoods throughout the city that were populated by these kinds of buildings. And it was done because there was no transportation and people walked to work. And many of these have fallen victim to fire or whatever. And this one survived over the years. And actually, Mr. Stadelman has taken pretty good care of it. So,
I think this will be a great improvement for the neighborhood. I don't see any reason not to approve it. So I'd like to make a motion to grant with the stipulations stated before about the maintenance of the green space as illustrated.
on the motion, not only the green space needs to be maintained, I think we should mention something about the lighting in the parking lot. Mr. Stadelman is the expert on lighting, but obviously we want downward type lighting so that it doesn't light up the neighborhood. I think we need to stipulate that the board wants the lighting to be confined to the property and not lighting up the neighborhood. I'll throw that out there. Anybody got any comment on that?
No, I'll agree to that stipulation, downward facing lighting.
I second the motion for the stipulation.
Okay, a motion has been made and seconded with those stipulations. Everybody okay with the stipulations? Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Lannis,
Yes.
Mr. Pina,
Yes.
Mr. Bernard,
Yes.
Chief Williams,
Yes.
Chair Galligan.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, that's 5 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative.
5 votes in the affirmative, none in the negative. The petition is granted.
Thank you, folks. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you all. No questions for me.
Thank you, guys.
Chief, is there any more business before us tonight?
No, one more. The next petition of Next Grid Incorporated, 159 Torrey Street, Brockton, Mass, for a special permit or other relief as the zoning ordinances may provide, to seek approval for a ground-mounted solar field allowed by Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 3, in an R1C zone located at 159 Torrey Street. Is the petitioner ready?
Yes, we are. And thank you very much. Again, Mr. Chairman, members of the Zoning Board of Appeals, my name is Jim Burke, an attorney at law with offices at 48 North Pearl Street in Brockton. I have the pleasure of representing NextGrid. NextGrid is a Delaware corporation. In fact, they are situated in California, and they are a renewable energy developer with significant projects throughout the United States. Currently, they have over $200 million of sites under development in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and over $600 million in projects across 21 states. Daniel Serber is here with me, and he's the director of development of the corporation. And we also have the engineer Richard Grady, who has assisted us with some of the plans. Essentially, NextGrid approached the Thorny Lee Golf Course, which has been in business for approximately since the 1900, and inquired about the possibility of creating a ground-mounted solar array in the portion of the property that is basically the northernmost section of Thorny Lee, that is behind, if some of you have been there, the 8th hole. It's surrounded by Gary's Farm on two sides and on a residential property identified as the Thornley Terrace area, as well as another development off of Braymore Road, or actually it's not Braymore. But that specific property contains a large section of cleared land that has been utilized by Mr. Gary to farm, I guess, for 30 or 40 years for a minimal fee for Thorny Lee. And what they seek to do now is to be allowed to have a solar array on that property. In fact, the property is going to be buffered from that area near Thorny Lee. It also will not cut any trees as part of the installation of the property. So it is going to be virtually impossible to see the solar field from any of the surrounding residential properties other than the farm area, which should not be a project. Dan is going to speak about the project, but essentially what we're going to do is connect to the National Grid project. The property will be accessed through the West Street gate. There will not be any construction vehicles that will go up through Thorny Lee Terrace. Because of the size of the property, or rather the size of the development and the fact that it's already cleared, it alleviates the need for substantial heavy equipment to go in there. And Dan thinks that it'll approximately take about a month to go ahead and complete construction. The hope would be, if it's at all possible, is to do it within the winter season, both for purposes of the golf course and for the developer. The maintenance of the property is going to be minimal. I had put in my brief that it's approximately, from prior projects that I've worked on, a vehicle a month. Dan corrected me, and essentially, since it's going to be monitored wirelessly in terms of whether or not there is any needs for the project, it's likely that there will probably be 3 vehicles a year that will access the property to view and maintain it. It takes minimal maintenance on the property, and I would suggest I want to get to the before turning it over to Dan to talk about the actual construction and how they work. 48 Section 3 was passed by the legislature that basically identified that municipalities shall not unreasonably regulate solar projects in any of its communities, except for public health, safety, and welfare. Our ordinance, in fact, does not touch upon solar projects at all. It's not a use that's allowed or not allowed in any particular district. So what you have is the 48 Section 3 basically supersedes in that it is an allowed use as it is. So this is one of our earlier attempts at coming in with, I think there will be a number of other projects related to solar for the city, but it has been identified by the building department and the law department. But the best approach would be for the applicant to seek a special permit. And the special permit would again be related to the fact of whether or not the property would derogate in any way from the public health, safety, or welfare of the community. I think in all 3 instances, it's clearly a non-issue. In terms of public health, there is no traffic impact in this property. There's no impact in the surrounding neighborhood. You can't see it, you can't hear it. You essentially don't know that it's there. You have no problems with public safety because of the, there is no requirement essentially for police or fire supervision. And as Dan will get into in some detail, even the battery system is very extravagantly designed so that it has its own fire suppression system maintained within the unit. And in terms of the welfare, essentially, and we've identified some of the improvements and the impacts, It helps Brockton get in the field of reducing carbon footprints. It clearly Brockton, because it's an older city, does not meet the suggested 25% requirements of the state. It is in fact a positive green project that'll have virtually no impact on the surrounding neighborhood. And it will also provide revenue to the city, because as part of the development project, we will be entering into a pilot agreement with the city of Brockton in relation to the specific project. So I'd like Dan to go ahead and run through the project, its size, and have any technical questions that you need answered. Dan?
How do you do? So thank you guys for having me. It's nice to be virtually at the city of Brockton. I'm based in Marshfield, so not too far away from you guys. I've enjoyed coming to your restaurants and having a good time in your town or your city. It's great to bring you guys a very rare win-win project where we get to work with a long-established, iconic local golf club that, with the COVID crisis that is happening, is experiencing some financial instability that we are able to help them with by providing regular lease revenue to them without taking away from their business whatsoever. The site will not be visible from the golf course itself. It is replacing what was being leased to a farm, and there was intermittent farming. From what I understand, it's been less and less as the years have progressed. And photovoltaics, which is solar, is very similar to photosynthesis. It's getting power from the sun. So, I got my start developing solar in farm communities, and a lot of them viewed it as a very similar use. So I'd like to think it's the same here, kind of carrying on that tradition there of harvesting the sun for the good of the community. So this site isn't going to be seen by both the golf course, as there's already an existing wall to the southern border. And then between where our system will be and that wall is where the golf course does a lot of their staging activities. So they have piles of dirt, soil, and seedlings, different plants, and that use will remain. And then on either side, east and west, there's substantial wooded buffers that naturally occur. So we're not cutting any trees. If there is any visual impact to one of the few residential units that shares a border with the property that isn't taken care of by the natural buffer, we're committed to providing either local flora or just putting in giant arborvitaes or Leland cypress, so that there's no possibility this is going to be seen by any of the neighbors. The way the site is so wonderfully flat, we're not going to do any major civil work. That's one of the reasons why we're anticipating the construction cycle to be so short on this project. We're really going to keep the natural grade as much as possible. And then we'll just have piles driven directly into that soil. We'll be putting down a hydro seed of a local seed mix with pollinators. So it essentially creates a meadow. The site will be fenced in, raised 6 inches above the ground, so local species can still go in and out of the area as they always have, and it seems to be a safer place for some smaller mammals, and the hawks and such tend to like it as well because they know where to find their food. So it tends to fit in well with the natural areas, similar to a golf course. Like Attorney Burke mentioned, it will also not be heard. We're using one central inverter that's located near the south. We're situating it just so it's closest to the point of interconnection, which is an existing pole on the golf course property. You can see by the manufacturer specifications and various studies that have been done by the state of Massachusetts that, pretty much after 100 or so feet, these things become inaudible toward background noises. And this is about 200 feet away from the nearest property line and 250 to 300 feet, I believe, to the nearest residential unit. And again, these things don't function at all at night when it's dark. So when background noise goes away, the solar will also not be functioning either. We do have a battery storage system that'll be placed on a concrete pad. I'm not a total expert on the technology, but it does come with a warranted fire suppression system. So, you know, there's no chance that this is going to become a burden on the local fire department. I mean, it's a fairly straightforward project, in my opinion. And I think Attorney Burke did a good job of talking about this state law that kind of governs the hindrance of this kind of development. And we do want, you know, I think maybe it's good to open it up to questions now.
Okay, very good. Any questions from the board?
I found the operation and maintenance plan to be quite impressive to the benefit of the lesser and to the neighborhood, I guess. But also a part of that is a decommissioning plan. Under what scenario would this project be decommissioned?
The end of the lease.
So, yeah, so we're just used to providing these decommissioning plans because most towns require them. And the reason they require them is because we have a contract with the utility that lasts 20 years and we have a few 5-year renewal periods. And the thought among communities is that once that time period is complete, what's the benefit of us of doing all the work to go ahead and remove that and return the land of something we're leasing? So a lot of towns institute this policy of having a decommissioning bond so that system won't become a burden on the city or town that the system is in. This is actually set so far back from any public right of way. I don't think anybody would know it's there, but it's just a still kind of state standard policy that we provide a decommissioning, you know, bond for when the life of the contract's completed.
Thank you.
Our zoning doesn't say much of anything about this project. However, I agree that granting a special permit at least gives us the opportunity for a public hearing on this and to get an overall view of what you intend to do up there. As part of a granting of a special permit, we can put stipulations that we think are important to this. And what you just mentioned, it really is kind of critical, the decommissioning, in that in 20 years, if something changed, that we got electricity from some other source, without this plan, you could just walk away and leave this thing sitting out in the middle of the field. So if this was a stipulation as part of a granting, that in this plan, there is a decommissioning, I think to answer my board member's question, if you should decide to walk away from this, there's a plan to dismantle it and get it out of there. That's how I see it.
Definitely.
I just want to make sure that I fully understand that all of the construction vehicles that are going to be working here will be coming in off of a gate off West Street on Thorny Lee property.
That's correct.
So this will have no construction effect whatsoever on all those residents on Thorny Lee Terrace.
None at all.
None. There is an access way when I went up there and looked at the end of Thorny Lee Terrace that apparently the power line runs down that access way into the golf course. Is this where the power line would make connection to the power lines on Thorny Lee Terrace? Is that how the power is going to get out of this place?
Yeah, so there'll be no construction by us, NextGrid, or any of our subcontractors, but Eversource will be upgrading the line that goes from west to Thorny Lee Terrace and then onto the property to an existing pole. Right now it's a single phase service and they're going to be upgrading that to a 3-phase service to accommodate our project. You know, according to the folks at the golf course, that access was regularly used for a time being for employees, and you know the neighbors didn't like it, so we figured they wouldn't like us using it either. So we just decided to squash that, you know, right when we heard that, and access off of West instead.
Well, personally, I think you made a good decision because that access way is very narrow. It's probably only about 20 feet. And for a period of time with trucks going in and out of there, it's going to really disrupt that neighborhood for a period of time. So if the golf course is going to benefit from this and all of the traffic is going to be on the golf course itself, that takes that whole neighborhood right out of the equation. That's the way I see it. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yep, we agree. Yes, totally.
So
It was
the only
designed that way.
impact, the only impact on that neighborhood would be an upgrading of the current electrical service that already exists on that street.
Correct. From single phase to three-phase service, yes.
Okay. Can you, or did you tell us something about the security of this facility? I read it's going to be fenced. You said it's going to be up off the ground so the animals can get in. Is there anything like cameras or anything that watch this place?
So we don't usually provide a security system. There's nothing really to steal. We do, again, it's remote monitored. So if someone were to disconnect something, we would be alerted immediately. But as far as cameras, you know, we have had communities want us to put those in as a condition of use, and we're able to do that, certainly. We've also had communities require us to have barbed wire or not have barbed wire, and we kind of leave that up to these special permit hearings because such a moving target. We'd rather just do what the town wanted, frankly.
So I guess you know much more about this than I do. What would you suggest for that chain link fence? Should it be barbed wire on the top or not?
We usually just do a 7-foot chain link fence.
Okay, so then if you did have a problem, you can go back and put the barbed wire up if you want.
Yeah, we could.
All right. So if somebody should do any damage in there, like damaging one of the photovoltaic things, you're going to see that. That's going to show up somewhere.
Yeah.
What about the building that you have all your goodies in? Is that monitored at all, or how is that handled? That just locked up and secured?
Yeah. So, I mean, the battery storage system is in a big locked, essentially a box car. And that's very secure. And then our inverters are also locked, so they have key access. There's an emergency shutdown on the outside for the fire department, but the actual access to the inside of it is locked. And then the panels are bolted on. And I've been in the solar industry for 10 years, and I've developed in the last 4 years in Massachusetts, and before that in really rough parts of California. And the only time we ever had a panel break due to people was New Year's Day. Bullets fell on it, you know, and we knew right away that some panels broke.
Okay. All right. So I'll agree with that. So if it's secured and you've had a past history of that being sufficient, then that's fine. What about access for emergency vehicles? If an emergency vehicle had to get into this, how would they get in there?
So the proposed is to have a Knox box at the West Street entrance. We can also have a Knox box for emergencies only at the Thorny Lee entrance. And then there's the entrance like the employees use through the front parking lot. And there's paved access all the way to the back there.
All right, that could be a stipulation. I'm going to defer to the fire chief on that. What do you think about 2 Knox boxes, one at each location?
Yeah, I have to be honest, I'm not sure that road that comes in off of West Street, there's certain areas that it's very narrow. I don't think we could get a piece of fire apparatus in there. I have to be honest, I'm very familiar with this area, and unless there was some widening of roads, I don't think we'd have to go in on foot from a certain point on the golf course.
So is it reasonable to go in by foot from the end of Thorny Lee Terrace? That would be much closer, I would think.
Yeah, that might be a better possibility, only in an emergency situation, yeah.
What do you think about a stipulation on here that the developer of this property has to provide training for the fire department before this goes online?
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, we have had this training in the past on this, several solar fields in the city that we have trained on. So this really isn't brand new to us. But it could be something to discuss later.
Is the petitioner okay with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, anybody else want to make any comments? So what I'm looking at right now is the emergency vehicle access. There'll be no tree cutting. If there is openings where there is a sight line from current houses, you're willing to plant trees to buffer that.
Yep.
And I am going to reference, if this is approved, the operation and maintenance plan as a stipulation to this.
Yeah.
We have a lot of things in it that are necessary.
Yeah, definitely. So it's our experience mostly that that's handled during the the special permit hearing, and they'll just actually reference that in the approval.
Will there be any lights lit out there at night, or is it be all in darkness?
No lights.
No lights. Okay. All right, any other board members? Going to close that portion of the hearing. I'm going to open it up for public discussion. Is there anyone here that wants to speak in favor?
I see none, Chair.
Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close that portion of the hearing. Is there anyone here that wants to speak in opposition?
I see none, Chair.
We'll close that portion of the hearing. Is there any public officials that want to be heard on this issue?
I see none, Chair.
Okay, I'm going to close that portion of the hearing. I'll now open it up for deliberations from the board. Board members.
I have no questions, but as a resident who lives not too far from the area, in a city this size, I don't know, you really can't ask for a more suitable neighbor who's not going to cause any disruption in the neighborhood, and a nice quiet neighbor, which is what you want. I would be willing to make a motion to grant with the stipulations.
Second.
Okay, a motion has been made and seconded to grant with the stipulations. Everybody okay on the stipulations? We're all good?
Would you repeat the stipulations, please?
No tree cutting. The trees that are there now are going to remain. Any openings that are visible from current houses, they are going to plant trees to cut down on the visibility to the site. Emergency vehicle access will be in conjunction with the fire department and training with the fire department. I think that was it.
Inclusion of the operation and maintenance.
That's correct. I have that, yes. I'm sorry. The manual that they submitted. Yep. All right, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Lanus.
Yes.
Mr. Pina.
Yes.
Mr. Bernard.
Yes.
Chief Williams.
Yes.
Chair Galligan.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, that's a 5 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative.
I thank the board.
5 votes in the affirmative, none in the negative. The petition is granted.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So before we quit tonight, that's our last case. On behalf of the members of the Zoning Board of Appeal, I want to wish everybody a happy, safe, and healthy holiday season. Stay away from the COVID. And we'll see you next year.
Thank you. Best wishes to everybody.